Before there were names, there was stillness. Before there were calendars, before hours and minutes, before the counting of days, there was only the long, immeasurable breath of the earth, a planet turning silently without witness, a world that was not yet described, not yet measured, not yet told. We live now in a universe woven out of language. Every bird, every flower, every star above us carries the burden of its name. We reach for labels instinctively, as though the act of naming anchors reality. But what was Earth before words? What was the sea before it was sea, or the sky before it was sky? Can beauty exist without the gaze that beholds it, without the tongue that declares it beautiful? To imagine the earth before names is to enter a silence more profound than any we have ever known. Not simply the quiet of a still night, but the quiet of a world in which no meaning has yet been spoken. The volcano erupts, but there is no word for fire. The oceans roll, but there is no word for water. Mountains rise in their terrible grandeur, but there is no word for mountain. It is a world that is wholly itself, self-contained, without description, without memory. And yet, even then, Earth was a garden, not in the human sense, a plot marked out, cultivated by careful hands, but in the deeper sense of a place where life could someday flourish. A garden without a gardener, a place of cycles waiting to begin, soil still forming, oceans condensing, minerals crystallizing in the depths of the cooling crust. A garden made not of green, but of possibility. The strangeness of this vision lies in its stillness. For though the early earth was tumultuous, awash in storms of fire and stone, there was no consciousness to feel it as chaos. There was only the inevitability of matter moving, colliding, fusing, breaking apart. What we might call violence was simply process. What we might call silence was perhaps the purest kind of presence. Think of silence not as absence, but as fullness. In our lives, we tend to treat silence as the gap between things, as the pause between words, the breath between sounds. But silence is also a presence of its own. The silence of the earth before names was not empty. It was whole. It was the silence of a planet exhaling, gathering itself, preparing to host the miracle of life. Scientists tell us that this story began some 4.5 billion years ago, when dust and rocks circling the newborn sun coalesced into a sphere of fire. The earth was born not in peace, but in heat, its surface molten, its skies filled with vapor. And yet, even then, the planet was tending itself, cooling, hardening, giving shape to what would one day become continents and seas. No eye saw it. No mind named it. And still it unfolded. There is a paradox here. We can only tell this story because we exist, because language exists, because memory exists. And yet, the story we are telling is precisely of a time before us, before memory, before words. The very act of imagining Earth without names is an act of naming. We cannot fully step outside of language, and yet we are drawn to the attempt. Why? Perhaps because something in us longs to know what it means to simply be. Every culture on Earth has felt this longing. Myths of origin bloom in every tradition. The Garden of Eden, the cosmic egg, the primordial waters. We tell stories about what came before, stories as though we cannot bear the thought that beginnings might be wordless. Perhaps this is because words are our way of weaving continuity. Without them, time feels fractured. With them, we can imagine wholeness. And yet, even as we tell these stories, we sense the truth. Earth's beginnings belong to a silence older than any scripture. They belong to a time when the world was sufficient unto itself, when no story was needed. This does not diminish our myths, nor our science. Both are attempts to lean against the silence, to rest our heads against the immensity of what came before us. To lie in bed and think of this silence is to feel the weight of something beyond comprehension. Imagine it, a whole planet turning through space, wrapped in storms and seas, and yet, in some sense, quiet. Not empty, not barren, but whole. To imagine this is to step outside of human time. It is to feel the hum of the infinite, the calm inevitability of processes that did not need our eyes or our words. In this sense, the earth before names is not entirely gone. It is present still, beneath the chatter of our languages, beneath the rush of our days. It is in the stillness we glimpse when we pause and listen. It is in the moments of dreamless sleep, when the mind drifts beyond words. It is in the silence of deep time, echoing across every stone, every ocean, every atom of our being. And so we return to the metaphor, earth as garden. A garden before memory, a garden without a gardener. Its soil was not yet fertile in the way we understand fertility, but the ingredients were gathering. Water was condensing, minerals were forming, cycles of heat and cold were establishing patterns. Slowly, inevitably, the earth was preparing to bloom. To listen to this story is to let the mind soften. We are not asked to imagine the details of magma and atmosphere, but the feeling of a world waiting. We are invited to enter the stillness before the first breath of life, a stillness that is not absence, but promise. And as we enter it, something shifts in us. For we, too, are gardens before memory. Each night, before dreams take shape, we drift into a nameless silence. Each morning, before words rise in our minds, we inhabit a few fragile seconds of wordless being. In those moments, we are closer than we know to the earth before names. To imagine the earth before time had names is to step outside of time ourselves. To feel that silence is to touch something eternal, something that belongs not to history, but to being itself. And so, as the story begins, we return to silence. The garden is here, waiting. The soil is ready. The breath of life has not yet come, and yet it is near. The silence of beginnings is not an emptiness, but a fullness, an echo of what is to come. The garden waits, and we wait with it, poised at the edge of memory. The silence of beginnings is not the silence of stillness. It is the silence of storms no ear could hear, the silence of fire without a name, the silence of oceans without a word for blue. When earth was young, its surface was restless. Seas of molten rock stretched across its skin, glowing rivers flowing like blood beneath a sky thick with vapor. Meteors rained down, striking with unimaginable force, folding craters into the surface, boiling seas before seas had fully formed. Volcanoes tore open the crust, releasing gases that would one day build the atmosphere. Yet, in all this motion, in all this fire and fury, there was a silence that cannot be described. It was not the silence of absence, but of solitude. A silence not because there was nothing, but because there was no one. Imagine a lightning storm without an eye to see it. Imagine an ocean wave without an ear to hear it. Imagine fire without the word fire, or sky without the word sky. The earth roared with energy, but without perception, it was quiet. Without witness, it was nameless. Science paints this portrait in broad strokes. Some 4 billion years ago, the planet had already cooled enough for a crust to form, though it cracked and shifted under constant bombardment. Volcanoes released carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water vapor. Clouds gathered, dark and thick, and rain began to fall, perhaps for centuries at a time, evaporating, condensing, falling again, until the first oceans filled the basins carved by ancient impacts. The silence of those first rains is almost impossible to imagine. No creature stood to feel it on its skin. No forest caught the drops on its leaves. The water fell upon stone and returned to the sea in endless repetition, a rhythm without music, a cycle without memory. And yet, in this nameless silence, foundations were being laid. The elements mixed and mingled, forging the conditions for what would come later. The atmosphere thickened, the oceans deepened, the crust stabilized. The storms carved out a pattern, a rhythm that would one day support life. The silence, though absolute, was not empty. It was fertile. Philosophers have often wondered, is the world real without a witness? If no mind perceives a storm, does the storm exist in the same way? For the young earth, there was no perception, no gaze to make the world into story. And yet, it unfolded. Reality is not dependent on being seen. The silence before life was a silence of pure being, untouched by interpretation. It is difficult for us, as humans, to imagine such a state. We are surrounded by noise, of language, of thought, of culture, of memory. Even when we close our eyes, the mind fills with voices, with echoes, with fragments of meaning. But the first silence of earth was not like this. It was not an absence to be filled. It was the fullness of a world complete in itself. There is a strange comfort in that thought. The earth did not need us to be real. It did not need our eyes or our words. For billions of years, it carried on in silence, waiting without waiting. Perhaps this offers us a kind of release, that even without our constant grasping, our endless stories, the world is enough. To reflect on this silence is to feel time slow. The storms of the early planet lasted for millions of years, a span that dwarfs human history. Continents shifted, seas formed, skies cleared, all without hurry, all without record. There was no past, no future, only the long present of process. We might think of silence as something fragile, easily broken. But the first silence was vast and unbreakable. Even the greatest eruption, the most violent storm, did not disturb it. It was silence not in sound, but in meaning. It was the silence of a world before perception, a world entire unto itself. And perhaps we feel a shadow of that silence in our own lives. In the moments before sleep, when thoughts slow, when language dissolves, when memory fades, there is a silence that feels deeper than quiet. A silence in which we are still ourselves, and yet something more. This is the echo of Earth's first silence, present still within us. The Earth's long hush would not last forever. In the waters that gathered, chemistry began to stir. Molecules collided, bound together, broke apart, tried again. The first whispers of life were preparing to emerge. The first silence was not the end of the story. It was the soil from which story would grow. But for now, in this early chapter, we remain with the quiet. A planet of storms unrecorded, a planet of seas unnamed, a planet whole in its solitude. The silence before the first breath, before the first witness. The silence that was not absence, but fullness. The first silence of Earth. If silence was Earth's first language, water was its first memory. The oceans did not appear all at once. They were born slowly, drop by drop, in rains that lasted for centuries, in vapors condensed from the breath of volcanoes, in the slow delivery of ice-bearing asteroids from the far reaches of the solar system. The Earth, once a sphere of fire, became wrapped in cloud. cloaked in storms that fell endlessly upon its stone skin. With time, the rains pooled in basins, carving the first seas. Imagine those rains with no forests to drink them, no rivers to carry them, no creatures to feel their cool touch. Water fell upon stone and gathered only into itself, filling the hollows of the world, stitching the continents together with mirrors of blue. Science tells us that these oceans may have formed astonishingly early, perhaps within just a few 100 million years of Earth's birth. Zircon crystals, the oldest fragments of Earth's crust, carry traces of liquid water from nearly 4 billion years ago. This means that even while the young Earth was battered by meteor storms, even while fire and stone still defined its face, water was already present, already writing its story across the planet's surface. And what a story water would tell! For water is both memory and mirror. It carries within it the traces of all it touches. Every mineral dissolved, every rock eroded, every chemical mingled. It all becomes part of the water's record. In this sense, the oceans became Earth's first library, not of words, but of interactions, not of sentences, but of cycles. We call Earth the blue planet, and rightly so. From space, oceans dominate our view, covering more than 70% of the surface. But in those early ages, the blue was different. The seas were heavy with dissolved minerals, their chemistry strange to our eyes. They were not yet the oceans of coral and whales, not yet the waters that would cradle human ships, but something rawer, more elemental, a canvas waiting for its first inscriptions. In myth, water is almost always the beginning. In Sumerian stories, the primordial goddess Namu was the sea, mother of all that exists. In Greek myth, the world began with chaos, and out of that chaos came Oceanus, the vast river that encircled everything. In Hindu cosmology, the universe emerges from the cosmic waters. Always, water is first. Always, water is memory. Perhaps it is because water seems eternal to us, flowing through every living thing, cycling endlessly from sea to cloud to rain to river and back again. The water you drink today may once have been locked in the ice of a glacier, or coursed through the blood of an animal thousands of years ago, or fallen as rain on a forest long vanished. Water remembers. And so it was with the early Earth. In those nameless oceans, something remarkable began to happen. Complex molecules formed, colliding and recombining in the restless chemistry of the seas. Hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean spewed minerals into the dark, creating chemical gradients that may have sparked the first reactions of life. Tiny droplets, membranes, chains of carbon. They assembled, broke apart, and assembled again. If the earth before water was silence, the earth with water became a kind of whisper. The whisper of possibility, the whisper of memory. The seas were not yet alive, but they were fertile, filled with the ingredients from which life would one day emerge. To imagine these oceans is to imagine stillness on a scale that feels infinite. No birds skim their surfaces. No fish disturb their depths. No green growth line their shores. Only the endless rhythm of waves against barren rock. A rhythm without audience, without listener, yet eternal. There is something deeply calming in this vision. To picture an ocean without life is to return to a simplicity beyond imagination. The waves rise. The waves fall, endlessly, without story. The water reflects the sky, though the sky itself was alien then, tinted by the gases of a young atmosphere. Yet the pattern of motion was the same as now. a continuity that links us to those first days. Every wave you hear tonight, every ripple on every shore, is an echo of that first memory. We sometimes say that memory defines us, that to forget is to lose ourselves. But water shows us another way. Its memory is not linear, not stored in words or images. It is cyclical, endless, always flowing, always transforming. Water remembers by moving. It teaches us that memory can be fluid, that identity can be a cycle, not a fixed point. In the oceans, time began to stretch. Before water, Earth's story was measured in impacts and eruptions, sudden and violent. With water, the story slowed, deepened, expanded into cycles. Rain fell, rivers carved, seas rose and retreated. Patterns began, rhythms unfolded. It was here, in the patience of water, that life would find its first foothold. The oceans became the cradle, but more than that, they became the first continuity, the first memory. When life finally stirred, billions of years later, it was water that held it, nurtured it, carried it forward. Even now, every cell in your body is a small ocean, a saltwater echo of that first sea. We carry within us the memory of water. And so the story of Earth passes from silence to flow, from nameless stone to endless tide, from the quiet of a world unrecorded to the whisper of oceans writing the first patterns of memory. The seas would soon become gardens of chemistry, then gardens of life. But even before that, they were gardens of time, vast, reflective, cyclical, eternal. To remember them is to remember not only our origins, but the calm truth that we are part of something far older than ourselves. Water is the Earth's first memory, and it is also our own. Before green, there was stone. Before forests rose, before rivers carried life, the Earth was a garden of minerals. To us, stone feels inert, lifeless, a thing that endures but does not change. Yet, in the earliest chapters of Earth's story, stone was restless. Continents had not yet stabilized. Tectonic plates shifted ceaselessly, building and breaking mountains in spans too vast for us to imagine. Volcanoes breathed molten rock onto the surface, spreading plains of basalt, layering the crust with new minerals. Beneath the seas, hydrothermal vents spewed hot water rich with metals, sculpting strange chimneys of stone in the dark. It is in this mineral world that the seeds of life were first planted. Not green seeds, not roots or leaves, but chemical seeds, tiny interactions between elements sheltered in the porous surfaces of rock. At the edges of hydrothermal vents, iron and sulfur mingled, creating gradients of energy. Pockets of clay formed, trapping molecules within their fine lattices, holding them close long enough to spark new reactions. Stone was the garden bed of life. Science suggests that life may have begun in these mineral gardens. The microchambers of rock provided the protection that fragile molecules needed. Here, water and stone conspired together, cycling endlessly, trying combinations until the improbable became inevitable. The first membranes may have formed here, bubbles of fat that cradled molecules like wombs. The first chains of information, precursors to DNA, may have been copied and recited in these stony hollows. Imagine it, a world without trees, without moss, without even the faintest trace of green. And yet, beneath the waves, the planet was alive with invisible possibility, stone, water, and energy weaving together the first threads of life's long tapestry. To us, gardens are places of color and fragrance. But in this deep time, the garden was gray and black, rich with minerals, lit by the faint glow of geothermal fire. It was not silent, but humming with unseen reactions. Not a still garden, but a garden of transformation in which chemistry learned the rhythm of life. There is a strange poetry in this, that the things we consider lifeless, stone, metal, mineral, were, in fact, the midwives of life. We tend to think of life as something separate from the inorganic world, as though biology and geology are divided realms. But the truth is more intertwined. Life was born of stone, shaped by it, and still depends upon it. The calcium in our bones, the iron in our blood, the phosphorus in our DNA, all are gifts of stone, carried forward from that ancient mineral garden. And so, the garden before green was not barren. It was abundant in a different way, abundant in potential, abundant in chemistry, abundant in the cycles that would eventually blossom into life. Just as soil is dark and silent before the seed breaks open, so the stone garden was silent, waiting for the first bloom of biology. This vision also asks us to reconsider what a garden truly is. Is it a space that requires beauty, flowers, and fragrance? Or is it any place where conditions allow life to unfold? If the latter, then Earth has been a garden from the beginning, not because it was filled with green, but because it was fertile in essence. The stones themselves carried the codes, the structures, the patience necessary to give rise to everything we know. When we walk among rocks today, we rarely think of them as alive. Yet each stone we hold in our hands carries the memory of this ancient role. Each pebble, each mineral crystal, is a fragment of the first garden. We might think of rocks as slow, as unchanging, but they are the record keepers of the earth. Their layers speak of volcanoes, oceans, impacts, and time without witness. They are the oldest storytellers, speaking not in words, but in silence and endurance. The first garden of stone reminds us that life is not separate from matter, but an extension of it. That we are, in a profound sense, animated stone, minerals shaped into movement, into thought, into memory. And that, when we return to dust, we are simply returning to the stone from which we came. And so, the Garden of Stone was not only the cradle of life, but also its prophecy. For within stone was already the blueprint of what would come. The structures of crystal foreshadowed the structures of DNA. The patience of geology foreshadowed the patience of evolution. Before there was green, there was gray. Before there was life, there was stone. And in that mineral silence, the seeds of everything were planted. The earth, even then, was a garden, not of leaves or blossoms, but of stone. Life begins not with a shout, but with a whisper. Not with a sudden blaze, but with the faintest stirring of possibility. In the oceans of the early earth, in the mineral gardens beneath the waves, something quiet began to unfold. Molecules collided, embraced, broke apart, and began again. They were not yet alive, not yet carrying the spark we recognize as life, but they were moving closer, step by careful step. Imagine it. Chains of carbon forming and breaking, membranes rising like bubbles, fragile structures that dissolved almost as quickly as they appeared. And yet, each attempt left behind the possibility of another, until one day, one fragile cluster endured. It is impossible for us to know the exact moment, whether it happened in the warmth of a shallow tide pool, in the darkness of a hydrothermal vent, or in droplets of water upon volcanic rock. What we know is this: at some point, the border between chemistry and biology blurred. At some point, matter began to replicate itself, to carry information forward, to persist. This was the first whisper of life. For billions of years, the earth had been silent. Processes had moved. Storms had raged, waters had flowed, but nothing had remembered. With life, memory was born. Not memory in the human sense, not stories or images, but molecular memory, the ability to copy, to endure, to pass on. RNA strands folded upon themselves, making crude copies. Later, DNA would refine the process, but here, at the beginning, the simplest molecules already held the promise of inheritance. The first breath of life was not a sound, but a rhythm, the rhythm of replication, the rhythm of persistence, the rhythm of survival. Scientists still debate how it began. Was it in the protective walls of hydrothermal vents, where minerals created tiny chambers for molecules to gather? Was it in clay surfaces that held fragile chains in place long enough for them to replicate? Or was it delivered, in part, by the icy bodies of comets, bringing essential ingredients from beyond Earth? We may never know with certainty. But what matters is not the location, but the unfolding itself, the improbable becoming inevitable, the silent chemistry of a planet becoming the first pulse of life. It is tempting to imagine this beginning as fragile, precarious, a candle flickering in the dark. Yet, it is equally possible to see it as unstoppable. For once the conditions were present, water, energy, minerals, life was not merely a possibility, but a certainty. The whisper was destined to grow louder. This first whisper transformed the earth forever. Once life emerged, it began to shape the very conditions that had given birth to it. Microbes fed upon the chemicals around them, exhaling gases that altered the atmosphere. They spread across oceans and shores, multiplying beyond measure, their presence invisible to the eye but profound in effect. In their tiny movements, they began to weave the planet into something new. What is life? Is it defined by breath, by movement, by awareness? Or is it defined simply by persistence, the ability to endure, to carry forward, to change while remaining the same? In this sense, the first whisper of life is not separate from us, but continuous with us. The molecules that first stirred in those ancient oceans are still with us now, in every cell, every breath, every heartbeat. We are the echo of that first whisper. In myth, the beginning of life is often told as the gift of breath. In the Hebrew scriptures, God breathes into dust, and it becomes living. In many indigenous traditions, breath is the spirit, the vital force that animates matter. Even in modern science, respiration, taking in energy, transforming it, sustaining oneself, is central to life. The poetry of breath transcends language and culture, reminding us that to live is to breathe, whether of air, or of water, or of energy itself. And yet, the first breath was not air. The first breath was chemical exchange, molecules trading electrons, building and breaking bonds. Breath, at its essence, is transformation, and this was the first transformation that endured. There is wonder in knowing that life began so humbly. No grand event, no sudden creation, but a whisper in the dark oceans. Fragile, perhaps, but steady. Silent, perhaps, but relentless. And from that whisper grew forests and animals and consciousness. From that whisper grew memory, culture, myth, science, and song. Everything we know traces back to that quiet beginning. Sometimes, in the stillness before sleep, we can feel an echo of that first breath. The body rests, the mind drifts, and beneath it all is the rhythm of life continuing, without effort, without command. Cells replicating, energy flowing, quiet processes carrying us forward. Life does not need our awareness to continue. It began without us, and it will outlast us. The first whisper has never ceased. It is in the oceans still, in the forests, in the soil, in the air. It is in us, each of us, carrying forward a lineage billions of years old. We are not apart from that whisper. We are its continuation. And so, we return to the image, a world of stone and water, silent for billions of years. And then, the faintest stirring, the quietest persistence. A whisper that grew into a chorus. A breath that would one day fill the earth with voices. The first breath of life. The whisper that began it all. If the first breath was a whisper, the arrival of green was a song. For hundreds of millions of years after life first stirred, the earth remained quiet in a certain sense. Microbes lived and multiplied, feeding on the chemicals around them, leaving little trace. They were abundant, yet invisible, filling the oceans without transforming them. The planet was alive, but it had not yet awakened. And then something astonishing happened. Life discovered light. It is almost impossible to overstate the significance of photosynthesis. To take sunlight, something that pours freely across the earth, something intangible, weightless, endless, and turn it into food, into energy, into memory. It was an invention that changed everything. The earliest photosynthesizers were not plants, for plants did not yet exist. They were tiny cyanobacteria, drifting in the oceans, fragile, microscopic, barely visible, even if we could look back upon them. And yet, within their cells lay chlorophyll, a molecule unlike any other. With it, they captured photons of sunlight, used their energy to split water, and in the process released something new into the world: oxygen. At first, the oxygen dissolved into the seas. It reacted with iron, staining the oceans red, forming vast deposits of rust that would one day harden into stone. For millions of years, the oceans filled with these iron oxides, painting the seabeds in colors no eye had yet seen. It was a slow and patient transformation, almost invisible in the moment, but immense in hindsight. And then, when the seas could hold no more, the oxygen began to spill into the atmosphere. The Earth, for the first time, breathed. We call this the Great Oxidation Event, and it was both creation and destruction. For many of the early microbes, oxygen was poison. Whole lineages vanished, suffocated by this strange, reactive gas. Yet for others, oxygen was opportunity, a source of energy more powerful than anything that had come before. From this change, new forms of life would one day arise, capable of movement, complexity, thought. The inheritance of green is double-edged. It gives and it takes. It nourishes and it destroys. It transforms and it prunes. Yet in that balance, the earth blossomed into something new. To call this inheritance green is to speak not only of color, but of continuity. For the green of chlorophyll is the green of every leaf you have ever seen, every blade of grass, every forest canopy. The cyanobacteria of the ancient seas handed down a gift that plants would inherit billions of years later. The color of forests is the echo of microbes. The green we walk beneath is the memory of a time when light first became food. There is something deeply humbling in this. We tend to think of light as beyond reach, a thing that shines upon us but cannot be touched. And yet, within every leaf, light is captured, held, transformed. Sunlight becomes sugar. Sugar becomes energy. Energy becomes movement, thought, and life itself. When you breathe, when you speak, when you dream, you are living on sunlight transformed by green. Myth has long linked light with life. In many traditions, the sun is the source of all vitality, the god that sustains creation. The Egyptians worshipped Ra, the sun god traveling the skies in his boat. In the Vedas, Surya the sun was praised as the eye of the world. Even today, we instinctively equate sunlight with growth, joy, and energy. What science confirms is that these intuitions were not wrong. Light is life, and photosynthesis is the bridge between the two. The oxygenation of the earth did more than alter chemistry. It altered time itself. Before oxygen, the story of life was slow, limited to simple cells. With oxygen, new possibilities unfolded. Cells grew more complex, multicellular organisms emerged, diversity flourished. The tempo of evolution quickened. The Earth's clock began to tick in a new rhythm, one closer to the world we now know. To imagine this transformation is to imagine a planet exhaling for the first time. The atmosphere, once heavy with methane and carbon dioxide, began to clear. Skies shifted toward the blue we recognize today. The oceans changed color, their chemistry forever altered. The world grew brighter, more open, more breathable. The planet awoke, and in its breath was the promise of forests, of animals, of humanity itself. And yet, all of it began with silence. A single molecule capturing light in the depths of an ocean, splitting water, releasing oxygen. A process repeated billions of times, across billions of cells, patient, persistent, unstoppable. The green inheritance was not given in a moment, but accumulated across eons, until at last the earth was transformed. We inherit this gift every day. With every breath of oxygen we take, we are participating in that ancient exchange. With every meal we eat, whether plant or animal, we are consuming sunlight stored in living form. The inheritance of green is not past. It is present, woven into the fabric of every living moment. There is a quietness in this truth, a calm realization that we are not separate from the ancient cyanobacteria, not separate from the forests, not separate from the light. We are continuations of that first discovery. We are sunlight carried forward. And so the story of Earth deepens. From silence to water, from stone to breath, from breath to light. Each step building upon the last, each inheritance passed down. The Earth is not simply a garden, but a lineage of gardens, each preparing the way for the next. The green inheritance was more than survival. It was the moment the Earth learned to sing, a song of sunlight, of oxygen, of life. A song that still resonates in every forest, every meadow, every breath we take. The earth became green, and in that greenness, the world was forever changed. Before trees, before flowers, before the green canopies we know today, the earth was already covered in forests. Not forests of wood and leaves, but of stone-like mats rising from shallow seas, built not by plants, but by microbes. These were the first cities of life, the stromatolites, layer upon layer of bacteria, sediment, and sunlight woven together into vast colonies. In shallow tidal waters, where the sun could reach the seabed, cyanobacteria gathered into sheets. They grew upon themselves, trapping grains of sand and minerals, building upward in patient, rhythmic cycles. Over time, these layers hardened into stone, leaving behind fossil monuments that can still be found in the rocks of Western Australia, Greenland, South Africa, and elsewhere. These stromatolites are the oldest living memory of the Earth, relics of a time when forests were not made of trees, but of microbes whispering in unison. For billions of years, these microbial structures dominated the planet. They were not silent. They breathed oxygen. They transformed sunlight. They filled the seas with life, but they were unnoticed by any eye. The only witnesses were the waters themselves, the tides rising and falling, the winds sweeping across shallow lagoons. To imagine these forgotten forests is to imagine a world utterly unlike our own. The continents were barren, lifeless, void of greenery. No birds sang in the air, no insects hummed in the grass, for there was no grass, no trees, no soil. All life existed in the seas, and within the seas much of it clustered around these microbial mats. They were oases of productivity, the gardens of an otherwise silent world. The stromatolites were more than colonies. They were communities, cooperative and enduring. Each layer built upon the last, generations of microbes stacked together, a kind of sedimentary family tree. One layer captured sunlight, another protected from toxins, another trapped sediment to build new surfaces. The result was a structure at once biological and geological, living stone. And in their persistence, these microbial forests remade the world. By exhaling oxygen for billions of years, stromatolites and their kin filled the atmosphere, laying the foundation for the eventual rise of complex life. Every breath we take today is linked to their ancient labor. They are the gardeners of the earth's deep past, the architects of the air. Yet they are forgotten. Few people know their name. Fewer still have stood beside them in the remote bays where they continue to grow. To modern eyes, they appear humble, lumpy stone mounds rising from shallow waters, unremarkable, quiet. But these quiet forms once ruled the earth. They were the forests before trees, the ecosystems before animals, the silent engineers of the breathable world. Their story also carries a reminder of impermanence. For though they flourished for billions of years, their reign was not eternal. When animals finally appeared, grazing and burrowing, the microbial mats were consumed, disrupted, broken apart. The rise of complex life meant the decline of stromatolites. Today, only a few places on Earth still host them, relics of an age that has passed. And yet, in those few places, we can still see them. In Shark Bay, Australia, they rise from turquoise waters like ancient ruins, their rounded shapes weathered by the tides. Standing there is like standing at a threshold of time, watching the breathing remnants of the earliest Earth. They remind us that life does not always announce itself with grandeur. Sometimes the most important transformations happen quietly, in forms we might overlook. Philosophically, the stromatolites invite us to think differently about memory. We often imagine memory as something stored in the brain, in thoughts, in stories. But the earth remembers, in stone, in layers of rock, in the chemistry of its oceans and air. The stromatolites are not just fossils. They are memory made visible, the planet's diary written in stone and light. What does it mean that these forests are forgotten? Perhaps it means that we, as latecomers, focus on what resembles us, trees, animals, motion. But the forgotten forests teach us humility. They show us that life can be vast, powerful, world-altering, and yet invisible to those who arrive later. They show us that even the smallest, humblest forms can hold dominion over time itself. In mythology, forests are often places of mystery, of transformation. They are settings where heroes wander and gods dwell. The microbial forests of deep time are mythic in their own way. They are not places one could walk through, not places where birds sang or leaves rustled. And yet, they were sacred landscapes, holding the breath of the future, preparing the earth for all that was to come. If we could stand on the shore of that ancient world, we might hear nothing but the wind and the water. We might see only stone-like mounds in the shallows. And yet, we would be standing before the very lungs of the earth, the forests of time, forgotten now, but eternal in their legacy. Even in forgetting, they remain. In the oxygen we breathe, in the carbon we exhale, in the balance of the atmosphere that sustains us. We are children of their labor, whether we know their name or not. The forgotten forests of time. Ancient, patient, enduring. Silent builders of the world we now inherit. Every inheritance carries both blessing and burden. Oxygen, born from the green discovery of photosynthesis, was no exception. What to us is the breath of life was, to most of the Earth's earliest inhabitants, a slow and merciless poison. For billions of years, life had thrived in an oxygen-free world. The chemistry of those early oceans was rich in iron and sulfur, a chemistry perfectly suited to the first microbes. They did not breathe as we do. They drew their energy from the Earth's raw minerals, from volcanic gases, from the intimate dance of heat and stone. To them, oxygen was alien, reactive, corrosive, destabilizing. When the cyanobacteria began to spread across the shallow seas, releasing oxygen as a byproduct of their sunlight feeding, the oceans absorbed it hungrily. The free iron in the waters bonded with it, precipitating out into oxides. The seas themselves changed color, shifting from greenish and murky to rusty red as iron settled to the seafloor. This is the source of the banded iron formations we still mine today, stripes of red and gray stone, recording that ancient chemistry like a planetary pulse. But the seas could only absorb so much. Slowly, steadily, oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere. For countless species of anaerobic microbes, this was the end. Their world, once stable and nourishing, became toxic. Oxygen infiltrated their cells, tearing apart molecules, disrupting delicate balances. Vast swaths of microbial life suffocated, driven into extinction by the very breath that would one day sustain us. This was not a single cataclysm, but a slow, drawn-out crisis, a billion years of dying. The Earth was in transition, a planet caught between two chemistries, two modes of life. One fading, one ascending. The seas themselves bore witness, their layers recording the red tides of iron as oxygenate waves pulsed through them. Scientists call this moment the Great Oxidation Event, but the phrase is almost too sterile for what it was. For it was not just a change in atmosphere, but a planetary revolution. A quiet apocalypse that extinguished entire lineages and reshaped the possibilities of life forever. To imagine it is to imagine standing at the edge of an ancient shore, watching the waters glimmer under the sun. The tide recedes, and in its wake the sand gleams red. Not with blood, but with rust, the slow bleeding of iron into the ocean floor. The seas, once fertile with life invisible, are now deserts in many places, emptied by the very oxygen that promised a future. And yet, out of this crisis came opportunity. Those organisms that could survive oxygen's bite learned to harness its power. For oxygen is not only destructive, it is potent. To burn food with oxygen releases far more energy than the primitive metabolisms of the past. It was, in effect, a new kind of fire, one that could be contained within the body of a cell. Those who adapted to it thrived, and from them complexity would one day emerge. In this way, the death of one world became the birth of another. The Red Seas were not simply an ending but a transition, a thinning of life's tapestry in order to weave a stronger, more intricate one. Extinction and opportunity, loss and renewal, paired together as they would be many times again in Earth's history. There is a mythic resonance here, for so many human stories echo the same pattern. Floods that wipe away civilizations only to make room for renewal. Fires that destroy forests, only for seeds to awaken in the ash. The Earth's own story of oxygen is perhaps the oldest version of this theme, that creation and destruction are inseparable, that the breath of life is also the hand of death. Philosophically, it also reminds us of perspective. To us, oxygen is natural, invisible, ordinary. It is what allows us to walk, think, dream. But to those ancient microbes, it was the end of the world. What is life-giving in one era may be deadly in another. The same element that defines our existence was once the terror that extinguished billions. Perhaps there is a lesson in humility here, that what we call stable is always temporary, that the very foundations of life are built upon upheaval and change. The seas turned red, and the world was undone so that another world could emerge. And so, the earth carried forward. Its skies grew clearer, its waters richer in oxygen, its future more open. The forgotten forests of stromatolites continued their patient work, even as whole microbial empires collapsed. The air grew breathable for forms of life not yet imagined. What remains today are the stones, the iron deposits, the layered rocks, the chemical traces in ancient sediments. These are the scars of the oxygen crisis, written across the planet's body. They remind us that every breath we take is not only a gift, but a legacy of survival. Life endured the Red Seas. Life adapted. And in that adaptation, it prepared the way for all that followed. The seas turned red, and in their redness was both death and promise, a reminder that every transformation of the earth carries both shadow and light, that every garden must sometimes be pruned to bloom anew. Every great story has a turning point, a moment when something improbable unfolds and changes the course of everything to follow. For life on Earth, one of those moments came not with a new element, not with a great catastrophe, but with a quiet partnership, a dream within the smallest structures of existence. It began when single-celled organisms, drifting in the oxygenated seas, faced a challenge and an opportunity. Oxygen, once a poison, had become a powerful energy source. Some cells learned to survive it, to use it, but survival came at a cost. Harnessing oxygen was messy, dangerous. It produced byproducts that could damage the very life it fueled. The path forward required innovation, cooperation, and, above all, imagination. Somewhere in those ancient seas, a cell engulfed another. This was not unusual. Cells consumed each other endlessly. But this time, something different occurred. The swallowed cell was not digested. It lingered inside alive. Instead of being broken apart, it began to live within its host, offering a new kind of service. It was good at burning oxygen, good at releasing energy in usable form. And so, the two cells formed a pact, protection and shelter in exchange for power. This was endosymbiosis, the merging of two lives into one. The guest became the mitochondrion, the powerhouse of the cell, still carrying traces of its once independent existence in its own DNA. The host became more than it had been, able to generate far more energy than before. Together, they gave rise to a new kind of organism, the eukaryote, a cell with complexity, with compartments, with a future more open than any lineage before. In a sense, this was the first dreaming. For within the membrane of a single cell, multiple stories began to intertwine. One cell dreamed within another, and together they created a vision neither could have achieved alone. This was not merely survival. It was imagination written into biology. From these eukaryotic cells came everything that would one day walk, fly, swim, and grow tall. Plants, animals, fungi, every multicellular being traces its origin back to this quiet merger. Every breath of ours, every thought, every movement of muscle is powered by those ancient guests, still living inside us, still burning oxygen, still fulfilling a pact made billions of years ago. There is poetry in this, that we are not singular, but composite, that each of us is not one, but many. Our bodies are mosaics of ancient alliances, our very cells symphonies of cooperation. We are the descendants of a union, a relationship so enduring it has become invisible. Scientists, when they trace this history, often speak in terms of efficiency, energy, survival, advantage. But beyond the technical language lies something almost philosophical. For what is this moment but a lesson in the power of partnership? That when two beings meet, not as predator and prey, but as allies, entire new worlds can be born. It is easy to forget that this could have gone differently. The engulfed cell could have been digested. The host could have rejected the intruder. The experiment might have failed, and complexity might never have arisen. For billions of years, life was simple, single-celled, repeating its quiet cycles. Without this leap, perhaps it would have remained that way forever, a planet of microbes endlessly circling in time. But the leap did happen. The dream was dreamed, and with it came the possibility of bodies with many cells, of tissues and organs, of minds that could reflect upon their own origins. Complexity is not inevitable. It is the fragile outcome of chance, of relationship, of a willingness to transform. Philosophically, this turning point whispers something profound, that identity is porous, that the self is never entirely alone. Within us, the mitochondria continue their work, carrying DNA that is not wholly ours, remnants of their independent life. In every breath we take, we affirm the continuity of this ancient pact. We are, in the deepest sense, hosts to other lives, and in that hosting, we become more fully ourselves. Consider the dreamlike strangeness of this truth, that inside your body are countless descendants of once free organisms, still burning oxygen, still whispering energy into your being. They do not speak, but their presence is constant. They are both part of you and not you. They are the silent companions of your existence, as old as the earth's red seas, as enduring as the flow of time. If we look to myth for resonance, we find echoes everywhere. Stories of twins who must journey together, gods who merge into one another, lovers who cannot be separated. The human imagination has always known that two can become one without losing themselves. Endosymbiosis is the biological version of this archetype, written not in story but in DNA. In this way, the rise of eukaryotes is both a scientific and a philosophical turning point. Scientifically, it is the basis for all complex life. Philosophically, it is a reminder that wholeness often arises not from isolation, but from union, that the deepest creativity occurs when boundaries blur, when one opens to another, and something new is born. The dream in the cell was quiet, invisible, unheralded, and yet it was one of the most consequential events in the history of life. From it came the possibility of forests reaching into the sky, animals roaming the land, and minds capable of asking, even now, how did it begin? Every time you breathe, every time your muscles move, every thought your brain generates. These are the echoes of that ancient dream. A cell within a cell, a pact that became a world. Dreaming in cells. The world within the world, the story within the story. A memory not only of where we came from, but of what it means to be alive at all. Not all of history rushes forward. Some of it lingers, stretches, drifts. There are moments when the planet seems to hold its breath, when change moves so slowly it is almost indistinguishable from silence. After the dream of eukaryotes began, The Earth entered such a time, a billion years of waiting, known to science as the boring billion. It is a deceptive name. To us, it suggests monotony, a lack of story. But to the Earth, it was a season of refinement, a period of patient preparation. For nearly 1,000 million years, life remained mostly single-celled. The seas were alive with microbes, but the great dramas of forests, animals, and ecosystems lay far in the future. Imagine the oceans then, vast, quiet, filled with invisible kingdoms. Each droplet a cosmos, each cell a small experiment in endurance. Eukaryotes, with their newfound complexity, existed, but they remained solitary or loosely colonial. The leap to multicellularity had not yet taken hold. It was as though the world, having dreamed of complexity, chose to linger in meditation before moving forward. In this stillness, the Earth itself changed in subtler ways. The continents drifted, mountains rose and wore down, rivers carved new paths. The atmosphere stabilized into its oxygen-rich balance. The climate oscillated, but without the extreme upheavals of earlier ages. It was as though the stage was being set, patiently and deliberately, for what was to come. To a human mind trained to expect rapid transformation, this span is almost inconceivable. A single million years is longer than our species has existed. Multiply that by 1,000, and you have this era of quiet persistence. Entire universes of microbial life rose and fell, unseen to us, but they left little trace in the fossil record. The rocks remember, but faintly. The silence of this age is the silence of absence, of things not yet possible. And yet, this was not wasted time. Within that stillness, cells were refining their craft. They were learning to coordinate, to regulate, to communicate. The genetic toolkit that would one day allow cells to form tissues and organs was being assembled piece by piece. Proteins evolved to stick cells together, to send signals, to build frameworks. It was as if evolution was writing the language of complexity in secret, rehearsing the words long before speaking them aloud. There is something deeply philosophical in this, that patience can be creative, that slowness is not emptiness. The boring billion was not boring at all. It was the gestation of possibility. Just as a seed lies dormant before sprouting, just as winter holds the potential of spring, so too did this era hold the potential of multicellular life. To imagine it is to imagine deep time at its most tranquil, a billion years of twilight oceans filled with the whisper of microbes. Each sunrise and sunset passing without fanfare, each wave carrying invisible empires. The earth turned, the moon pulled the tides, the stars wheeled overhead, and still life remained quiet. It is a vision of time stretched almost to eternity, where change occurs not in bursts, but in whispers. And yet, even in this long stillness, there were glimmers of what was to come. In shallow seas, colonies of algae experimented with simple cooperation, forming filaments and sheets. Some cells began to specialize slightly, taking on different roles. These were the first hints that life could become more than the sum of its parts, that individuality could be woven into community. But the full leap into multicellular existence required not just genetic innovation, but planetary conditions. The atmosphere needed more oxygen. The oceans needed more nutrients. The Earth itself had to be ready, as though life and planet were dancing partners waiting for the right rhythm. For now, the music was slow, the dance subdued. Philosophers might see in this era a metaphor for human existence, that there are times when nothing seems to change, when life feels still, even stagnant. But beneath the surface, unseen foundations are being laid. Silence is not emptiness, it is preparation. Stillness is not absence, it is gestation. The earth, too, had to wait, had to linger in long meditation before the flowering of complexity could arrive. When we look back at this boring billion, we see more than an empty chapter. We see the patience of nature, the willingness to take time, to allow the slow unfolding of potential. It is a reminder that not all progress is visible, and not all transformations are rapid. Sometimes the most important revolutions begin in silence, and only reveal themselves after ages of waiting. And so the world turned, age after age. Cells dreamed within cells, practicing their hidden choreography. The seas shimmered with invisible life. The continents drifted. The sky shifted. And in that long stillness, the seeds of the future were sown. From the outside, it may appear uneventful. But from within, it was the slow construction of possibility, the quiet before the symphony, the silence before the chorus. The earth was waiting, and in its waiting, it was becoming ready. For billions of years, life had been whispering. Cells drifted, colonies wove themselves together, but the planet was still quiet. Then, suddenly, the silence broke. About 541 million years ago, the oceans erupted with form and movement. The Cambrian explosion, the flowering of bodies, had begun. It was not a literal explosion, but compared to the long stillness before, it was a burst of creativity unlike anything the earth had ever known. Life, once small and simple, unfolded into strange geometries, segmented bodies, jointed limbs, eyes that could see, mouths that could bite. For the first time, the seas teemed with visible creatures, moving, swimming, burrowing, hunting, fleeing. It was as though the world, long asleep, had suddenly awakened to music. The fossil record remembers this moment with startling clarity. In places like the Burgess Shale in Canada, the rocks preserve delicate traces of these early animals. We see creatures with spines and shells, worms with frilled appendages, beings so alien they look like dreams. There was hallucigenia, a worm-like form bristling with spines, opabinia, with 5 eyes and a long, clawed proboscis, anomalocaris, a predator larger than any creature before, with grasping arms and circular jaws, and countless others, each one a note in the symphony of emergence. For the first time, ecosystems formed with depth and intricacy, predator and prey, grazer and hunter, burrower and swimmer, an interlocking web of relationships. The ocean floor was no longer quiet mud. It became alive with tunnels, tracks, and trails. The seas rang with movement, as though the world had discovered choreography. What made this sudden flourishing possible? Scientists offer many answers. Rising oxygen levels provided the energy for larger bodies. Genetic innovations, such as the Hox genes, allowed organisms to build complex forms with repeating segments, eyes, and limbs. Ecological pressures, predation and competition, drove arms races of innovation. And the environment itself, with shifting continents and shallow seas, created niches to be filled. But beyond the technical explanations lies a deeper mystery. Why such creativity, then, after billions of years of restraint? Perhaps it was simply that the stage was ready, and the players had been rehearsing in secret during the long stillness. When the conditions aligned, life did what it always does. It imagined new ways to be. This was more than evolution, it was artistry. The first symphonies of form. Each organism an experiment, a note in the unfolding score. Some forms endured and gave rise to familiar lineages. Arthropods, mollusks, chordates. Others vanished, leaving behind only their fossil traces, strange notes that never repeated. Together, They composed a music that still echoes today in every fish, insect, bird, and mammal. Philosophically, the Cambrian explosion invites us to think of life as a creative force, not merely a struggle for survival, but a flowering of possibility. It is easy to imagine evolution as harsh competition, a relentless filter. But here, in this sudden blossoming, we glimpse another truth, that life is also playful, experimental, willing to explore every corner of form. It tries, it dreams, it invents. Consider the eye, which first appeared in this era. Light had always been present, but now creatures learn to sense it in ways more refined than before. The invention of vision transformed the seas. Predators could spot prey. Prey could detect threats. The dance of hunter and hunted grew more intricate. Yet beyond survival, vision opened a new dimension of experience, the ability to perceive the beauty of light itself, the shimmer of the ocean, the glint of another's body. In every glance you take today, you inherit that moment when eyes first opened upon the world. The Cambrian seas must have shimmered with strangeness, alive with creatures whose forms we can barely imagine. Each one was an answer to the question, what is possible? Each one was a declaration, life can be this, and this, and this. From silence emerged music, and from music, complexity. To rest with this thought at night is to feel the wonder of possibility itself, that from simple beginnings, from stillness and patience, comes eruption and abundance. That the world is not only a place of endurance, but a place of creativity. The first symphonies did not end with the Cambrian. They were only the opening movement of a much longer song. But they set the tone, that life would not remain confined to simplicity, that it would unfold into astonishing variety, that it would continue to surprise itself. The oceans became an orchestra, each creature a voice, each lineage a melody. Some melodies continue still. Others fell silent long ago. Together, they composed the music of earth. The Cambrian explosion reminds us that change is not always gradual. Sometimes the world leaps. Sometimes the quiet stretches of preparation give way to sudden flowering. It is as true in evolution as it is in our own lives. There are seasons of stillness, and then, without warning, the music begins. Even now, we carry the echoes of that symphony. Our bones, our muscles, our nerves, our eyes, all trace back to experiments first attempted in those ancient seas. We are living extensions of the music that began 500 million years ago. The symphony has not ended, it has only deepened. The first symphonies of life. The moment when silence became music, when stillness became movement, when the earth at last sang aloud. After the first symphonies of the Cambrian, life did not retreat back into silence. It grew louder, more layered, more intricate. The seas became gardens. Coral reefs spread like underwater forests, weaving skeletons of calcium and light. Algae painted the shallow waters in swaths of green. Tiny plankton filled the sunlit waves, the invisible architects of oxygen. For the first time, the planet shimmered with ecosystems that were not merely survival, but beauty. Coral reefs are sometimes called the rainforests of the sea, but in truth, they are older, more enduring. By the Ordovician period, some 450 million years ago, reefs stretched for miles, alive with trilobites, brachiopods, and the earliest fishes. They were not yet the dazzling tropical reefs we know today, but they were complex, layered structures, habitats for countless species, sanctuaries of color and shape. The earth was learning to build communities. Life was not confined to the water alone. In the quiet margins of the sea, green algae began to creep onto damp stone. simple filamentous forms at first, clinging to wet shorelines. It was a hesitant step, but it marked the beginning of one of the greatest transformations in Earth's history, the greening of the land. To imagine this moment is to see a barren world. The continents, until then, were silent expanses of rock and sand, sculpted only by wind and rain. No roots yet pierced the soil, no leaves rustled in the air. But at the water's edge, small pioneers stretched upward. Moss-like plants, liverworts, and hornworts emerged. They carried with them the chlorophyll of their algal ancestors, and with it, the power to harvest sunlight and transform air. It was an audacious move. Land offered new possibilities, light undimmed by water, vast open space, unclaimed territory. But it also offered challenges: dryness, gravity, ultraviolet light. To survive, these early plants had to invent new strategies. They grew waxy coatings to hold moisture, tiny pores to breathe, structures to anchor themselves in soil. Evolution was teaching them to live in air. And with plants came the slow transformation of the Earth's surface. Roots broke down rock, creating soil. Leaves decayed, enriching the ground. Streams carried nutrients inland. The barren continents began to soften, to green. What had once been lifeless stone became landscapes capable of hosting abundance. In the seas, fish took their first shapes. Jawless at first, armored with bony plates, they swam through coral forests, grazing on plankton, darting among the reefs. Later, jaws appeared, an invention that changed everything. With jaws came new diets, new possibilities for predation, new balances of power. The ocean was becoming an arena of predators and prey, a web of interactions more dynamic than ever before. Together, these changes, the rise of reefs, the greening of the land, the invention of jaws, reshaped the Earth. By the Silurian and Devonian periods, the planet was no longer a world of microbes and small experiments. It was a world of forests, both beneath the waves and above them. To stand in that time, if we could, would be to witness the first true gardens of the Earth. Coral reefs alive with color, shallow seas painted with algae, shorelines fringed with moss and small plants, each one a herald of future forests. It was a planet beginning to breathe more deeply, to fill itself with green and growth. Philosophically, this greening is a profound moment. The act of life stepping from water to land is not just a biological transition. It is a symbol of boldness. To leave the familiar behind. To risk dryness and death for the possibility of expansion. Every tree that stands today, every forest that shelters us, is an echo of that first act of courage. And there is something meditative in the way plants change the earth, not through violence, but through patience. They did not conquer the land in a rush. They inched forward season after season, root by root. They softened stone into soil. They spread green across continents. Their revolution was quiet, but unstoppable. As plants transformed the land, they also transformed the air. They exhaled oxygen in abundance, reshaping the atmosphere yet again. The skies grew richer, clearer. With more oxygen, animals would one day grow larger, more energetic. The stage was being set for future dramas. But for now, it was enough that the earth was greening, that the seas and land were alive with forests of coral and green. To drift into sleep with this vision is to picture the earth at one of its most beautiful turning points. From barren rock to living garden. From silent shorelines to mossy edges. from algae drifting in shallow waves to forests waiting in potential. The world was becoming lush. The earth was learning the language of forests. And so, the great symphony of life moved into a new key: coral and plant, reef and moss, fish and fern, the first great greening of the world. The silence of stone gave way to the murmur of leaves, the whisper of water moving through roots, the chorus of reefs humming beneath the waves. The earth had learned to sing in green. With the land now softened by mosses and early plants, life began to stretch taller, thicker, bolder. The Devonian and Carboniferous periods brought a new grandeur to Earth's stage. The continents, once bare, became cloaked in forests. Towering trees rose, their trunks wide and fibrous, their branches reaching into the sky. The world was becoming shaded, canopied, filled with the cool silence of green cathedrals. These were forests unlike those we know today. There were no flowering plants, no pines, no grasses. Instead, strange trees dominated: giant lycophytes, towering horsetails, and ancient ferns. Some grew more than 30 meters high, their trunks ribbed with scars from fallen leaves, their crowns forming tangled networks of fronds. Their roots spread shallowly across swampy soils, weaving mats that anchored the ground. The land, once barren, now held vast, humid jungles. Beneath this green canopy, the air thickened. Oxygen levels soared, reaching concentrations far higher than today. The breath of plants filled the atmosphere, and with it came transformations. Insects and amphibians, unbound by the constraints of thinner air, grew enormous. Dragonflies with wingspans the size of hawks drifted through the forests. Millipedes, longer than a human body, crawled across the damp soil. Amphibians the size of crocodiles lurked in shadowed waters. It was an age when the ordinary seemed impossible, when life swelled with excess as though intoxicated by abundance. The swamps of the Carboniferous were laboratories of transformation. In their tangled undergrowth, amphibians diversified into forms both strange and familiar, some resembling giant salamanders, others precursors of reptiles. The first reptiles themselves appeared, their scaly bodies better adapted to dryness, their eggs capable of surviving beyond water. It was a subtle but monumental step. For the first time, animals could fully claim the land as their home. No longer tethered to ponds or streams, they could wander into forests and hills, carrying with them the possibility of future dynasties. Meanwhile, the plants themselves transformed the earth in profound ways. When these ancient trees died, their trunks often fell into waterlogged swamps, where decay was slowed. Over millions of years, their remains accumulated, compressing into thick layers of peat, and later into the coal that fuels modern industry. To walk in the forests of the Carboniferous was to walk among the ancestors of the energy that would one day light human cities. The breath of those trees still burns in our fires today. Philosophically, the Age of Giants offers an image of excess, of life not simply surviving but overreaching, experimenting with scale, testing the limits of size. It reminds us that abundance can give rise to grandeur, but also to imbalance. For as oxygen soared, so too did the risk of fire. Forests of the Carboniferous may have burned with a ferocity unknown to our modern world. lightning igniting infernos that roared through towering lycophyte groves. The same air that allowed dragonflies to grow immense also fed flames that consumed forests. Abundance was both gift and danger. There is a quiet lesson in this paradox, that growth without restraint can become fragile. The age of giants was not eternal. As continents shifted and climates changed, many of these vast forests collapsed. The great lycophyte trees dwindled. The giant insects shrank as oxygen levels fell back toward balance. What seemed permanent was only a chapter. The earth, as always, moved on. And yet, the echoes remain. Every forest today, every towering tree, is a descendant of those ancient experiments in height and strength. Every reptile, from the smallest lizard to the largest dinosaur, traces its lineage to those first animals that laid their eggs in dry forest soil. Even coal buried deep beneath our feet is a whisper from those giant swamps, a memory of an earth that once drowned in green. To close your eyes and imagine this world is to step into a dreamscape both alien and familiar. A humid haze clings to the air. The ground trembles with the weight of immense insects. Dragonflies with glassy wings drift like ghosts through shafts of green light. Amphibians slip silently into dark waters while reptilian pioneers tread cautiously through ferns. Above it all, the trees rise, their trunks like pillars, their crowns weaving a canopy so thick that little sunlight reaches the forest floor. It is a vision of grandeur, but also of transience. The giants did not last forever. They were a movement in the symphony, a crescendo of growth and scale followed by silence. Their lesson, perhaps, is that greatness is often temporary, that life blooms in excess and then settles into balance once again. As we drift toward rest, the age of giants invites us to ponder our own scale. We, too, live in a time of abundance, of towering creations, of power drawn from ancient forests. But like those dragonflies and lycophytes, we are bound to the limits of the earth's breath. To walk gently in this knowledge is to honor both the grandeur and the fragility of life. The Age of Giants, a world of trees that touched the sky, insects that filled the air like birds, and amphibians that prowled like kings. A reminder that the earth has known abundance beyond imagination, and that every forest we wander today is an echo of a time when life dreamed in giant forms. The earth has never promised permanence. Every flourishing age carries with it a shadow, and every garden, no matter how lush, eventually bends to silence. The Age of Giants, with its forests of lycophytes and dragonflies larger than birds, seemed boundless. But in time, the balance of the world shifted. The air thinned. The forests fell. What was once a crescendo of life became a quieter refrain. Extinction has always been the earth's stern but necessary teacher. It does not arrive as cruelty but as transformation, an erasure that clears the way for what is yet to come. During the late Devonian and into the Carboniferous and Permian periods, waves of extinction swept across the planet, pruning the tree of life. Entire branches were lost, others forced into new directions. It was as though the earth paused, took a breath, and chose a different song. The late Devonian extinction, more than 360 million years ago, dimmed the waters. Vast forests had spread across the land, their roots breaking stone and releasing nutrients into rivers and seas. These nutrients fed algae, which bloomed excessively, clouding waters, consuming oxygen, and suffocating marine life. The oceans, once radiant gardens of coral and trilobites, became choking swamps. Reef systems collapsed. Species that had thrived for millions of years vanished in silence. On land, the forests persisted, but the rhythm of life was unsettled. Amphibians and the earliest reptiles survived, adapting to the shifting world. Those who could endure scarcity, who could breathe in difficult places, who could live beyond water's edge, carried the lineage forward. Extinction had chosen its survivors. Later, as the Carboniferous gave way to the Permian, the Earth shifted again. The continents, once scattered, drew together into a single supercontinent, Pangaea. The climate grew harsher, more extreme. Vast deserts spread across the interior of this great landmass, while forests shrank back to wetter margins. The age of giants dwindled. The lush coal swamps became memories buried beneath sand and stone. And then, at the end of the Permian, the greatest extinction of all arrived. Scientists call it the Great Dying. More than 250 million years ago, volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia poured immense floods of lava onto the land. The eruptions lasted for hundreds of thousands of years, releasing carbon dioxide and methane in staggering quantities. The planet warmed. The oceans grew acidic. Oxygen in the seas collapsed. On land, temperatures soared beyond the tolerances of most creatures. More than 90% of species perished. Life itself seemed on the edge of erasure. For millions of years, the Earth was quiet. Coral reefs vanished. Forests thinned. Deserts spread across continents. For the first time since life began, it seemed possible that the planet might return to silence, to stillness, to the long emptiness of stone. The Great Dying was not merely an extinction. It was a cleansing, a reordering of possibility. And yet, even here, in the deepest silence, renewal began. Tiny survivors clung on. Burrowing creatures hid beneath the soil. Hardy plants persisted along riverbanks. In the oceans, a handful of fish and mollusks endured. The world was scorched but not erased. From this crucible of destruction, new lineages would rise, the ancestors of dinosaurs, mammals, and many of the creatures we know today. Philosophically, extinction is both tragedy and necessity. It is the shadow that gives shape to life's brilliance, the silence that makes the symphony possible. Without endings, there can be no beginnings. The great forests of the Carboniferous had to fall for new ecosystems to emerge. The collapse of ancient reefs cleared the stage for corals and fish of different kinds. Even the Great Dying, catastrophic as it was, made space for the dinosaurs, and ultimately for us. To reflect on extinction is to reflect on impermanence. All things, no matter how vast, are temporary. The dragonflies with wings like hawks, the lycophyte trees that touched the sky, the trilobites that filled ancient seas, they were magnificent, and they are gone. Their absence is not failure. It is simply the way of Earth, the rhythm of time. And perhaps there is comfort here. The endings that seem final are always followed by renewal. The Earth knows how to recover, slowly, patiently. In the stillness after catastrophe, in the quiet centuries after silence falls, life gathers itself again. Shoots of green break through ash. Tiny creatures emerge from hiding. Evolution, never hurried, begins its work once more. As we drift towards sleep with this story, the lesson is gentle but profound. Permanence is an illusion. The forests we know today will one day vanish. The oceans will shift. Even mountains will fall. Yet renewal is certain, as sure as breath follows silence. The Earth story is not one of endless growth, but of cycles. Expansion and collapse, abundance and emptiness, life and extinction, always intertwined. Extinctions and renewal, silence and song, absence and return. To dream of these cycles is to rest in the knowledge that nothing is truly lost. Everything changes. Everything transforms. Everything flows. After the great dying, the earth was hushed. The silence stretched like a veil over land and sea. The planet had been scorched, its forests reduced to scattered remnants, its oceans emptied of their brilliance. Yet, in this quiet, something stirred. The survivors, small, unassuming, fragile, began to grow into new forms. It was as though life had been pressed through a narrow gate, and now, on the other side, the world was ready for transformation. From these survivors arose a new dynasty, the reptiles. They were tough, their scales holding water against the heat, their eggs secure against desiccation, their bodies adaptable to both harsh deserts and shifting wetlands. In a world where forests had fallen and climates were unstable, these traits gave them resilience. Slowly, quietly, they spread across Pangaea. Over millions of years, their forms diversified, from small lizards that darted among rocks to towering archosaurs, precursors of the greatest creatures the Earth had ever seen. By the Triassic period, the Earth's silence was giving way to new sounds. The rustle of reptilian tails, the hiss of predators, the rumble of great footsteps pressing into soft earth. The first true dinosaurs emerged, swift, bipedal hunters with sharp teeth and agile bodies. They were not yet the titans of myth, but they carried within them the blueprint of grandeur. In the shadow of extinction, the dream of dinosaurs had begun. As the Jurassic unfolded, this dream expanded into magnificence. The continents slowly drifted apart, climates stabilized, and forests returned in green profusion. Ferns, cycads, and conifers clothed the land. The air grew humid, the skies filled with insect hum, and into this lush world, the dinosaurs rose. They grew into giants, sauropods with necks that stretched like living bridges, bodies weighing as much as small mountains. They moved in herds, their footsteps trembling through the earth like distant drums. Predators evolved to match their size. Massive theropods prowled the forests and plains, their jaws lined with serrated teeth. Each step of the carnivores echoed hunger. Each chase, a reminder of the endless balance of life and death. Yet, not all dinosaurs were titans. Some remained small, nimble, feathered with early plumage, precursors of birds. Diversity was their strength, and through it, they filled nearly every niche of land and air. The seas, too, found new rulers. Enormous marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs shaped like dolphins, plesiosaurs with long, serpent-like necks, and mosasaurs with crushing jaws, patrolled the waters. Above, the skies grew restless with the beating of vast wings. The pterosaurs, some with wingspans greater than small planes, soared over coasts and inland lakes, their cries piercing the winds. The earth, once emptied by extinction, now thundered with vitality again. Philosophically, the rise of dinosaurs is a parable of patience. From the ashes of loss, from a silence so deep it seemed final, the earth did not simply recover. It blossomed into abundance more astonishing than before. It is a reminder that despair is never the final note. After ruin comes renewal, and sometimes renewal carries grandeur beyond imagination. The earth dreams bigger after every fall. To imagine the age of reptiles is to imagine a world both alien and familiar. Forests of cycads and tree ferns stretched across warm plains. Herds of sauropods moved like rivers of flesh, their necks swaying above the canopy, their tails cracking the air like whips. Carnivorous giants lurked at the edges of these herds, shadows among ferns. In the skies, leathery-winged pterosaurs circled, while in the seas, sleek hunters surged upward through shoals of fish. It was a world of immensity, of creatures that seemed mythic, yet they were real, written into the stone of time. And yet, even here, impermanence whispered. For all their might, the dinosaurs were bound, like all life, to cycles of change. Volcanic eruptions reshaped climates. Seas rose and fell. New species replaced the old. What we call the age of dinosaurs was not a static reign, but a constant renewal, species blooming, flourishing, vanishing, while others took their place. The grandeur was built on a foundation of endless transformation. For humans looking back, the dinosaurs carry a dual symbolism. On one hand, they represent dominance, a lineage that ruled the earth for more than 150 million years, far longer than our own species has existed. On the other hand, they embody fragility, for despite their strength, they too would fall, undone not by predators or competition, but by the slow grinding of geological time and, later, a sudden cataclysm from the sky. To rest in this knowledge is to breathe more softly. We are not the first to rule, nor will we be the last. Our monuments, like their bones, will one day be dust. And yet, like them, we are part of the earth's great dream, life swelling into form, shining for a time, and passing on its memory to the future. The age of reptiles, the dream of dinosaurs, is not simply a story of scale and dominance. It is a meditation on resilience. Out of extinction came renewal. Out of silence, thunder. Out of fragility, grandeur. It is a reminder that life, when given time, will always find a way to astonish. The story of life is not only written on the ground, in forests and seas, but also above us, in the vast and open sky. Long before humans dreamed of wings, the earth was already experimenting with flight. To imagine this chapter is to lift our gaze, to feel the hush of air as it holds a body aloft, to sense the freedom of drifting between clouds. The first to claim the skies were not birds, but their distant cousins, the pterosaurs. They rose in the Triassic period, delicate at first, with wings stretched from elongated fingers, their bones light and hollow, their bodies honed by the wind. Over time, they grew immense. Some, like Quetzalcoatlus, spanned the width of small airplanes, soaring silently over rivers and coasts. Their shadows must have swept across the land like drifting clouds, reminders that the Earth's creativity knew no boundaries. But the dream of flight did not end with leathery wings. Within the lineage of dinosaurs themselves, something subtle began, a reshaping of scales into feathers, a transformation of forelimbs into instruments of air. At first, these feathers may have served only as warmth or as display, shimmering in the sun. But nature is resourceful. Over generations, feathers extended, thickened, layered into fans and veins. What began as ornament became mechanism, and what began as survival became freedom. Archaeopteryx, the ancient first bird, embodies this threshold. Its fossilized wings, found in limestone more than 150 years ago, revealed the moment when dinosaurs became something more. Teeth still lined its jaw, claws still clutched its wings, yet feathers stretched along its limbs, and its bones bore the unmistakable architecture of flight. It was not yet the bird we would recognize in the garden or the sky today, but it was the bridge, the dream half-formed, the song of the air still tentative but aurea. The sky remembers everything. It remembers the vast sails of pterosaurs, the cautious leaps of feathered dinosaurs, the first trembling beats of Archaeopteryx. Over millions of years, these experiments refined themselves into grace. Birds diversified, filling forests and wetlands, coasts and mountains. Some skimmed over oceans for months, sleeping on the wing. Others darted through undergrowth, wings a blur between leaves. Songbirds arose, carrying music into the dawn, their voices weaving air into Poe. Philosophically, the rise of flight is a meditation on longing. To fly is to transcend limits, to move not in 2 dimensions, but 3, to be freed from the friction of stone and soil. Life, which began in water and then crept upon the land, now stretched upward into the open air. It is as though the earth itself dreamed of release, of escape, of something more expansive than weight and gravity. Flight is the expression of possibility made flesh. And yet, even flight is fragile. The air offers freedom, but demands precision. A misstep in wing or feather can mean failure. To live in the sky is to live close to the edge, balanced between soaring and falling. This fragility deepens its beauty. The sight of a bird aloft is a miracle of physics and patience, of evolution honing muscle, bone, and plume into harmony. It is grace born of necessity. Humans, gazing at birds, have always sensed something transcendent. Long before science explained lift and aerodynamics, people saw in wings a symbol of divinity, of freedom, of the soul itself. Myths across cultures imagine gods and spirits with feathers, messengers between earth and heaven. The Egyptians gave their sun God the wings of a falcon. The Greeks dreamed of Icarus, lifted too high by waxen feathers. The sky has always seemed like a place of secrets, and birds, in their effortless ascent, A.P. To rest with this story as night draws near is to feel the lightness of air in the imagination. The pterosaurs, long gone, still glide in memory. Archaeopteryx, fossilized in stone, still carries the tremor of its first wing beats. Every bird we see today, sparrow, hawk, hummingbird, is a living echo of that ancient dream. The sky remembers, and through the feathered creatures who still soar above us, it keeps the memory alive. For the earth, nothing is lost. The thunder of dinosaurs gave way to the whisper of wings. The age of reptilian giants dissolved into an age of skybound delicacy. What seems like an ending is always a transformation. The giants did not vanish entirely. They became smaller, lighter, faster. They traded the ground for the air. In every bird's flight today, the memory of dinosaurs stirs. The dream of scale became the dream of song. And so we are reminded, as we drift deeper into reflection, freedom is never absolute, but always relative. Even wings are bound to air. Even flight must bow to gravity. Yet within those bounds, beauty emerges. The bird in the sky does not escape the earth. It fulfills it, carrying the memory of soil, forest, and sea into the wind. Flight is not departure, but continuation. The earth itself rising to glimpse its reflection in the heavens. The sky remembers, and so must we. It is not only stone that tells the story of life, but feather, air, and song. To close one's eyes and imagine flight is to remember that we too are part of this lineage of longing. Creatures bound to the earth, yet dreaming always of something higher, lighter, freer. The reign of dinosaurs stretched across more than 150 million years. They filled forests, plains, skies, and seas. Their footsteps shaped the rhythm of the world. Yet even the longest reigns end. Life is never fixed. It flows like a river, always changing course. And so, in time, the giants fell. The moment was sudden, yet also prepared by deep time. For millions of years, the earth shifted beneath them. Volcanic eruptions in India darkened the skies with smoke and ash, poisoning the air with carbon dioxide and sulfur. Seas withdrew from coasts. Climates lurched between warmth and chill. Ecosystems strained. Yet still, the dinosaurs endured. They had faced upheaval before. They had adapted, survived, thrived. But then, from the heavens came something they could not outlast. 66 million years ago, an asteroid approached the Earth. It was 6 miles wide, a fragment of cosmic stone carrying unimaginable energy. When it struck the shallow waters of the Yucatan Peninsula, the world was unmade in a single instant. The impact released heat and fire beyond comprehension. Forests ignited across continents. Shockwaves tore through land and sea. The sky filled with vaporized rock, rising into a shroud that circled the globe. In the days that followed, darkness fell. Sunlight could not pierce the thick veil of dust and ash. The air chilled, plants withered, food chains collapsed. For creatures dependent on abundance, on vast forests of leaves, on herds of prey, the famine was inescapable. The great dinosaurs who had roamed so long and so far faltered. One by one, lineages vanished until silence spread once more across the earth. Yet even in that silence, small voices endured. Not all dinosaurs perished. Birds, fragile descendants of feathered lineages, found ways to survive, clinging to seeds, insects, and adaptation. Alongside them, another group that had lived in the shadows now stirred into prominence: the mammals. For more than 150 million years, mammals had existed as small nocturnal creatures, scurrying in darkness, feeding on insects, hiding beneath the weight of reptilian dominance. They lived in burrows, in crevices, in quiet places where giants paid them no heed. Their strength was not size, but subtlety. Warm-blooded, fur-covered, milk-bearing. They were caretakers of small lives in a world that favored grandeur. After the asteroid, it was these traits that proved essential. While the dinosaurs starved, many mammals could eat roots, seeds, and insects, food still available in the dim light. Their small size required less sustenance. Their capacity for warmth helped them endure the cooling climate. They survived not because they were powerful, but because they were humble. And so, out of catastrophe, a new chapter opened. With the fall of giants, niches were left empty. Forests regrew, seas replenished, ecosystems reset. Mammals, once confined to shadows, now emerged into daylight. Over time, they diversified. Some grew larger, others returned to the seas. Still others stretched toward the sky in glides and leaps. From their quiet resilience came the roots of the future. Philosophically, the fall of dinosaurs and the rise of mammals is a meditation on fragility and inheritance. Power is never permanent. Dominance is always fleeting. The titans of one age become the fossils of the next. Yet each fall clears the way for new beginnings, for new dreams to take form. Life does not cling to what was lost, it transforms. The Garden of Earth is always replanted after fire, flood, or stone. For humans, the gift of mammals is intimate, for we are their descendants. We carry within us the inheritance of their endurance, the warm blood that beats against the cold, the fur transformed into hair, the parental care that nurses the fragile young. We are not born of giants, but of small survivors who endured catastrophe by tending quietly to life. Our story is written not in dominance, but in persistence. To reflect on this is to find humility. We are not the pinnacle of Earth's history, nor the destined rulers of its future. We are one branch of the tree that grew after silence, one expression of a possibility that emerged when giants fell. To see ourselves in this light is to understand that survival is not about conquest, but about harmony with change, about flexibility, about patience. The asteroid that ended the dinosaurs did not end life. It redirected it. It opened the way for mammals to rise, for primates to evolve, for humans, eventually, to emerge. In this sense, we owe our existence to catastrophe, to an event that destroyed much but left a seed of potential alive. The gift of mammals is the gift of continuation, the chance to dream a different dream upon the earth. And so, as we listen to the silence after the fall, we hear not despair, but promise. For every ending is also a beginning. The sky that once belonged to pterosaurs and feathered reptiles now sings with birds. The land once ruled by dinosaurs now teems with mammals of every form. The story of life does not end. It changes its voice, it changes its rhythm, it remembers, and it continues. The fall of giants is not tragedy alone. It is the rhythm of impermanence, the turning of the earth's great page. And we, sitting here in the quiet night, are part of what came after, the continuation of a dream that began long before names, long before memory, long before time itself. The earth has known gardens long before we gave them names. Forests were gardens of shadow and fern. Oceans were gardens of coral and light. Skies were gardens of wings, and deserts, gardens of silence. Each age has carried its own bloom, its own harvest, its own fragrance of life, fleeting yet eternal in the story of the whole. We humans arrived late to this garden. The earth had already grown vast and ancient by the time our ancestors stood upright. Before we planted seeds, before we carved rivers, before we spoke, the planet had already rehearsed 1 billion cycles of birth and loss, growth and decline. The soil beneath our feet is made of everything that has lived before us. Each step presses upon the bones of trilobites, the leaves of vanished forests, the shells of forgotten seas. To walk upon the earth is to walk upon memory. And yet, in our late arrival, there is also wonder. We are heirs to the endurance of small mammals, to the resilience of feathered survivors, to the persistence of roots and spores that waited out catastrophe. Within us flows the inheritance of billions of years of trial and renewal. Every breath we take carries the oxygen born of ancient forests, the whispers of cyanobacteria who once painted the seas green. We are not separate from this lineage. We are its unfolding. Philosophically, this is the gentle revelation. The Garden of Earth is not a place outside us, but within us. We are of the same soil, the same minerals, the same carbon and water that have circled through stars, oceans, forests, and bones. To forget this is to feel alone. To remember it is to feel held. But the earth also teaches impermanence. Gardens bloom, and gardens fade. Entire lineages have blossomed in brilliance, only to vanish. The ammonites curled their shells into endless spirals. Now they exist only as stone. The dinosaurs thundered across continents. Now they live only in fragments of bone and in the flight of birds. Nothing endures unchanged. This truth, though difficult, is also tender, for it shows us that even endings are woven into the fabric of life. The memory of the garden is not sorrowful. It is not the lament of what is lost, but the music of continuation. The fern forests of the Carboniferous became the coal that warmed ancient mammals. The bones of trilobites became the limestone cliffs where birds nest. Every ending nourishes a beginning. The earth forgets nothing. It recycles memory into matter, sorrow into soil, extinction into possibility. We humans often imagine ourselves as separate, as rulers, as stewards standing above the world. But the garden corrects us. It humbles us. We are not above it, but of it. Our lives are not written in stone towers or iron machines, but in breath, in heartbeat, in the rhythm of tides. To see ourselves as gardeners of the earth is to misunderstand. We are, at most, flowers that bloom for a season. The earth is the true gardener, tending us with sunlight and rain, with soil and sky, with time itself. And yet, in our brief flowering, we are given a gift no trilobite or dinosaur possessed, the gift of reflection. We can look backward across deep time. We can imagine what came before us and what may come after. We can stand beneath the stars and feel both small and infinite, transient and eternal. In our awareness, the earth becomes conscious of itself. Through our memory, the garden remembers. At night, when the world is quiet and the mind drifts toward sleep, it is possible to feel this continuity more deeply. The boundaries of self soften. We dissolve into the wider story. The sound of breath echoes the waves of ancient seas. The beat of the heart mirrors the pulse of volcanic earth. Dreams carry us across epochs, where dinosaurs still roam, where trilobites still crawl, where forests rise and fall in endless cycles. Sleep is not absence, it is return. A return to the memory of the garden, where all things are one. The earth holds us gently. It has seen extinctions greater than our fears, transformations greater than our hopes. It does not rush. It does not despair. It remembers. The soil is patient, the seas enduring, the stars constant in their silent gaze. To rest in this truth is to release the weight of urgency, to surrender to the calm of being part of something vast. And so, as this long journey draws to its close, we are left with a simple invitation to remember. To remember that we are not a part, but a continuation of all that has ever been. To remember that gardens are fragile, but also resilient. To remember that even in endings, life renews. And most of all, to remember that in the quiet of night, when we drift toward dreams, we are returning to the oldest memory of all, the memory of the earth itself, before time had names. The garden endures. The earth remembers. And within that memory, we too are held, fleeting and eternal, a whisper carried on the wind of deep time.